Hello viewers, before we begin we would love for you to be part of our family. Subscribe today and turn on the bell notification. Now enjoy. The sun burned hot in the Lagos afternoon, making the air feel heavy. Cars honked, traders shouted, and the smell of roasted corn mixed with exhaust fumes. Darasimi balanced a tray of oranges on her head, moving between cars, hoping for customers. Business had been slow, and her feet ached from standing all day. She wiped sweat from her forehead, sighing. Then, a sleek black car pulled up nearby. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He looked important. Expensive suit, polished shoes. Darasimi's eyes followed him as he walked toward a small shop. Before he reached the entrance, his steps wobbled. His hand clutched his chest. Then, right there on the street, he collapsed. For a moment, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. People rushed toward him, not to help, but to take. Hands grabbed his wrist, snatching his watch. Someone yanked his phone. Another pulled his wallet from his pocket. Darasimi's heart pounded. She watched as his car door remained open, inviting thieves. Within seconds, the car was gone. The crowd disappeared, leaving the man lying helpless. She swallowed hard. Everyone had abandoned him. But she couldn't. She dropped her tray, oranges rolling in different directions, and ran to him. Kneeling beside him, she shook his shoulder. "Sir, wake up." No response. Her mind raced. She had no phone. No money for transport to get him to a hospital. But she couldn't leave him like this. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed his arm and tried to lift him. He was too heavy. Tears filled her eyes. "Somebody help me, please." People walked past as if they couldn't see her. Darasimi felt frustration rise in her chest. Fine. If no one would help, she would do it herself. She pulled his arm over her shoulder and, with all the strength in her small frame, began dragging him toward safety. Darasimi's muscles burned as she struggled to drag the unconscious man toward the shade of a nearby shop. Sweat trickled down her face, her breath coming in sharp gasps. People stared but didn't offer help. Some whispered, others shook their heads and walked away. Her heart pounded with frustration. "Why is everyone like this?" she muttered under her breath. But she couldn't stop now. The man's breathing was shallow, and his face looked pale. She had to do something fast. She glanced around, searching for any familiar face. Then, she spotted Aya Rizai, the woman who sold fried yam by the roadside. "Aya Rizai, please help me," she begged, her voice breaking. "This man collapsed, and nobody will help me carry him." Aya Rizai hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. "Darasimi, this one no concern you owe. UWN put yourself for trouble." Tears stung Darasimi's eyes, but she refused to give up. "Please, I can't leave him like this. He needs help." The older woman sighed and finally nodded. "Oya, let's carry him to my stall first." Together, they lifted the man and half-carried, half-dragged him to the wooden bench beside Aya Rizai's stall. Darasimi fanned his face with her scarf while Aya Rizai sprinkled some water on his forehead. "Maybe we should take him to the hospital," Darasimi said, glancing at his still form. "He doesn't look good." Aya Rizai clucked her tongue. "Hospital? You get money for that." Darasimi bit her lip. She didn't have money, but she couldn't just sit and do nothing. She rummaged through the man's pockets, hoping to find an ID, a clue to his identity, anything. Her fingers touched something. A small card. She pulled it out and read the name. Her eyes widened in shock. She had just saved one of the richest men in Lagos. Darasimi stared at the name on the card, her hands trembling. She had seen this name before, in newspapers, on billboards. She looked down at the man lying unconscious on the bench. How could someone so powerful end up like this, robbed and helpless on the street? Aya Rizai peered over her shoulder. "Who be this?" Darasimi swallowed hard. "His name is Femi Johnson." Aya Rizai's eyes widened. "You mean that big man, The one with plenty businesses? Darasimi nodded. Yes. For the first time, concern flickered across Aya Rizai's face. This one serious oh. The man groaned softly, his eyelids fluttering. Darasimi leaned closer. Sir, can you hear me? He tried to speak but only managed a weak sound. His fingers twitched, and Darasimi felt a surge of relief. At least he was alive. We need to take him to a hospital, she said firmly. Aya Rizai sighed. You still never tell me how you go pay. Darasimi looked around, desperate. Then an idea struck her. What if we take him to his company? Somebody there will recognize him. Aya Rizai hesitated, then nodded. That one makes sense. With effort, they managed to flag down an old taxi. The driver eyed them suspiciously. Where Unade go? Darasimi took a deep breath. To Johnson Holdings. We need to take this man there. The driver's eyebrows shot up. Johnson Holdings? NA joke? No, we're serious. His Mr. Femi Johnson. The driver's eyes widened as he looked at the unconscious man. Recognition dawned on his face. Ah, NA true oh. He unlocked the car doors quickly. Oya, carry a mentor. We no fit waste time. Darasimi and Aya Rizai struggled to lift him into the back seat. As the taxi sped off toward Victoria Island, Darasimi's heart pounded. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing: her life was about to change forever. Darasimi stared at the name on the card, her heart hammering in her chest. She had heard of him before. His face was always in the news, a billionaire businessman with companies across Nigeria. And now, he was lying unconscious on a wooden bench, looking nothing like the powerful man she had seen on TV. Aya Rizai peered over her shoulder. Ah, this is that rich man oh. The one that owns big companies. Darasimi swallowed hard. Yes, but what do we do now? Aya Rizai scratched her head. This one pass me. But if we carry him go hospital, at least dem fit call him people. Darasimi nodded. She turned to a young boy hanging around the stall. Femi, Abeg help us find bike man we fit carry him go hospital. Femi ran off while Darasimi turned back to the unconscious man. His breathing was still slow, his face too pale. Minutes later, Femi returned, dragging a reluctant bike rider behind him. The man frowned. I know they carry sick person oh. If anything happened to for my bike, na warala. Darasimi's hands trembled with frustration. Please, help us. He needs a hospital. The bike rider sighed and finally agreed. With effort, they lifted the billionaire onto the bike. Darasimi climbed on behind him, holding him steady as the bike roared to life. As they sped off, Darasimi sent a silent prayer into the wind. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was clear: her life was about to change forever. The bike weaved through the chaotic Lagos traffic, narrowly avoiding potholes and impatient drivers. Darasimi held tightly onto the unconscious man, her heart racing with every sharp turn. She had never been to a big hospital before, and now she was about to walk into one carrying a billionaire she barely knew. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Darasimi jumped off the bike and waved frantically at the security guards. Help! He needs a doctor, she cried. At first, the guards hesitated, eyeing her dusty clothes and tray of scattered oranges. But when they saw the man's expensive suit, their eyes widened. One of them rushed inside. Within moments, nurses and doctors appeared, wheeling a stretcher toward them. They lifted the billionaire carefully and rushed him through the hospital doors. Darasimi started to follow, but a nurse stopped her. Who are you to him? The nurse asked, eyeing her suspiciously. Darasimi hesitated. What was she supposed to say? I found him on the road, she admitted. He fainted, and people stole all his things. I couldn't just leave him there. The nurse sighed and pointed to the waiting area. Sit there. Someone will come and talk to you. Darasimi sank into one of the plastic chairs, her hands still trembling. The reality of what had just happened hit her all at once. She had just saved a billionaire. But what if something happened to him? Would they blame her? Her stomach twisted in knots as she watched the hospital staff rush around. She had done her best, but now, everything was out of her hands. Darasimi sat in the hospital waiting area, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. Time crawled by, and with every passing second, her anxiety grew. She had never been inside a place like this before: cold floors, white walls, and people rushing past in uniforms. It felt like a different world. She wanted to leave, to go back to her normal life selling oranges, but something inside her refused to move. She needed to know if the man she had saved was okay. "Excuse me." A deep voice startled her. She looked up to see a tall man in a suit standing before her. His face was stern, his eyes sharp. "Are you the girl who brought Mr. Adiwale here?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." The man sighed and took a seat beside her. "My name is Tunde. I'm his personal assistant." He eyed her carefully. "What happened?" Darasimi explained everything: how the billionaire had collapsed, how the crowd had robbed him, and how she had struggled to get him help. She left nothing out. Tunde listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back and rubbed his chin. "You're telling me that in a crowd full of people, you were the only one who stayed to help?" Darasimi shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't just leave him there." Tunde studied her for a moment, then stood up. "Wait here." He walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Had she done the right thing? Or was she about to get into trouble for interfering in a rich man's life? She hugged herself, trying to shake off the unease. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. Darasimi sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching people move in and out of the hospital. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten all day, but she ignored it. She just wanted to know if the billionaire was okay. Tunde returned a few minutes later, his face unreadable. "Mr. Adiwale is awake." Relief flooded through Darasimi, but before she could ask anything, Tunde continued, "He wants to see you." Her mouth fell open. "Me?" Tunde gave a short nod. "Come with me." Darasimi stood hesitantly and followed him through the hospital corridor. Her heart pounded with every step. What was she going to say to a man like him? What if he was angry about everything that had happened? When they reached the private room, Tunde pushed the door open and motioned for her to enter. Darasimi stepped inside slowly. Mr. Adiwale was sitting up in bed, his face looking slightly better, though there was still a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. He turned his head and met her gaze. "You," he said, his voice deep but weak. "You're the one who helped me?" Darasimi swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Why?" She blinked in surprise. Because you needed help. Nobody else was helping." A small smile touched his lips, but there was something else in his expression, something she couldn't quite place. "What's your name?" "Darasimi." "Darasimi," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. Then he exhaled and shook his head slightly. "You don't know what you've done for me." She frowned. "Sir." Instead of answering, he looked at Tunde. "Make sure she doesn't leave." Darasimi's eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean?" Tunde only gave her a small smile. "You'll see soon enough." Darasimi's heart pounded as she stared at Mr. Adiwale. What did he mean by making sure she didn't leave? Was she in trouble? Tunde gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Sir, I don't understand," she said carefully. "Did I do something wrong?" Mr. Adiwale chuckled, though it was weak. "Wrong? You saved my life." He shifted slightly, wincing. "If you hadn't stayed, I don't know what would have happened to me." Darasimi exhaled in relief, but confusion still swirled in her mind. "Then why do you want me to stay?" He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Because people like you are rare. His voice was calm, yet firm. In a city where money blinds people, you chose kindness over greed. She lowered her gaze. I just did what I thought was right. Tunde stepped forward. Sir, should I arrange for her to be taken home? Mr. Adiwale shook his head. No. First, she must eat. Darasimi's eyes widened in shock. She wasn't expecting that. Sir, I'm fine. He raised an eyebrow. When was the last time you ate? She hesitated. Truthfully, she couldn't remember. Between selling oranges all morning and running around trying to help him, food had been the last thing on her mind. I knew it, he said, signaling to Tunde. Get her food. Tunde nodded and left the room, leaving Darasimi alone with the billionaire again. She felt uncomfortable standing in such a fancy hospital room, surrounded by expensive machines and furniture. She didn't belong here. Mr. Adiwale watched her closely. You think this is strange, don't you? She nodded. Yes, sir. His lips twitched. Get used to it, Darasimi. Because this is just the beginning. Darasimi shifted in her seat, unsure of how to respond. Just the beginning? What did that mean? She wasn't looking for anything in return, she just wanted to help. But now, she was sitting in a billionaire's hospital room, being treated like someone important. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Tunde walked in, carrying a tray of food. The aroma of jollof rice and fried plantain filled the room, making Darasimi's stomach tighten with hunger. She hadn't realized just how empty she felt until now. Eat, Mr. Adiwale instructed. Darasimi hesitated. She wasn't used to eating in front of rich people, and she definitely wasn't used to being served. But the hunger was too strong to resist. She picked up a spoon and took a small bite. The flavors exploded in her mouth, making her eyes water. It had been a long time since she'd eaten something this good. Mr. Adiwale watched her with interest. Tell me, Darasimi, how long have you been selling oranges? She swallowed and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Since I was 10, sir. His expression darkened. And your family? She lowered her gaze. It's just me and my younger brother. We do what we can to survive. Silence filled the room. She didn't like talking about her struggles, but for some reason, it felt easy to tell the truth to this man. Mr. Adiwale leaned back against his pillows. You helped me when no one else did. I want to help you now. Darasimi's head snapped up. Help me? Yes. His eyes held something she couldn't quite understand. From this moment on, your life will never be the same. Darasimi blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Help? What kind of help could a billionaire possibly want to give someone like her? Sir, I don't understand, she said carefully, setting her spoon down. Mr. Adiwale studied her, his expression unreadable. You changed my life the moment you chose to stay. Now, I want to change yours. Darasimi shook her head. I wasn't expecting anything, sir. I only did what I thought was right. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why you deserve this. Tunde, who had been silent, stepped forward. Mr. Adiwale never forgets those who stand by him in difficult times. When you found him, he had nothing, no phone, no wallet, not even his car. And yet, you stayed. That means something. Darasimi looked down at her hands, overwhelmed. She had spent her whole life struggling, fighting to survive in a world that never seemed to care. And now, a man she had just met was offering to change everything. What do you want to do for me? She asked hesitantly. Mr. Adiwale's eyes held a quiet intensity. First, I want to make sure you never have to sell oranges again. You deserve more than that. Her heart clenched. Selling oranges was all she had ever known. It had put food on the table for her and her brother. But, sir. He held up a hand, stopping her protest. I'm not giving you charity, Darasimi. I'm offering you an opportunity. You have a good heart, and I want to see what you can do with it. She swallowed hard. This was too much, Too fast. But deep inside, something whispered that this moment was a turning point in her life. "What do you say?" Mr. Adewale asked, his gaze steady. Darasimi took a shaky breath. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like it might actually be something good. Darasimi's mind raced. She had spent years struggling just to get by, and now this man was telling her that everything was about to change. It didn't feel real. "Sir," she started, unsure of how to continue. "I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't understand how my life can suddenly be different." Mr. Adewale gave her a small smile. "Because I am going to make sure of it." She swallowed hard. A part of her wanted to believe him, but life had taught her that nothing came easy. "Why me?" she asked. "There are so many people in this city who need help." He studied her for a moment. "Because when you had the chance to walk away, you stayed. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." She lowered her eyes. No one had ever spoken about her like this before. People usually looked down on her because of her job, but here was a man who saw something different. Tunde cleared his throat. "Mr. Adewale, should we begin with what we discussed?" The billionaire nodded. "Yes." Then, turning back to Darasimi, he said, "From today, you will no longer sell oranges. I am offering you something better, a new start." Her breath caught in her throat. "A new start?" "Yes. You will have a proper home, an education if you want it, and a chance to work in an environment that will help you grow." Darasimi's hands trembled. It was too much. Too sudden. "Sir, I don't know if I can accept all this. It doesn't feel right." Mr. Adewale's smile softened. "I understand your hesitation, but let me ask you one thing. If your brother had this opportunity, would you tell him to reject it?" Darasimi's heart squeezed at the mention of her younger brother. She would do anything to give him a better life. She took a deep breath, her decision forming. Maybe, just maybe, this was the miracle she never saw coming. Darasimi sat in the back seat of the luxurious black SUV, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. The leather felt too smooth, the air inside too cool. Everything about this car screamed wealth, and she wasn't used to it. Tunde sat in the front, scrolling through his phone, while the driver maneuvered through the city streets. Her mind kept replaying Mr. Adewale's words. He had insisted that she would no longer struggle, that she would have a new life. But could she really trust it? She had spent too many years believing that nothing came easy. The car slowed down, then turned into a quiet estate. Darasimi's eyes widened. The houses here looked nothing like the cramped, noisy area where she and her brother lived. The gates alone were taller than anything she had ever seen. Finally, they pulled up in front of a beautiful white house with large windows. Before she could fully take it in, Tunde turned to her. "Welcome home." Darasimi's head snapped toward him. "Home?" Tunde nodded. "Yes. Mr. Adewale wanted you to have a comfortable place to stay." Her chest tightened. "But I can't stay here. It's too much." Tunde smiled. "You'll get used to it. Come." She hesitated before stepping out of the car. The air felt different here, calmer, cleaner. A woman dressed in a uniform opened the door, smiling warmly. "Good evening, Miss Darasimi." "Miss." Darasimi almost turned to check if someone else was behind her. She wasn't used to being addressed with respect. Tunde led her inside, and she gasped. The living room was huge, with soft-looking chairs, a glass table, and paintings on the walls. Everything looked expensive. Her legs felt weak. "This is too much," she whispered. Tunde placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Adewale believes you deserve this. And soon, you will too." Darasimi swallowed hard. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But maybe, just maybe, it would be something good. Darasimi woke up to the softest bed she had ever slept on. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The air smelled fresh, the room was cool, and the sheets felt smooth against her skin. Then it hit her, she wasn't in her tiny, stuffy room. She was in the house Mr. Adewale had given her. She sat up slowly, still adjusting to her new reality. Everything about this felt unreal. The night before, after Tunde showed her around, she had barely been able to sleep. Not because the bed wasn't comfortable, but because her mind wouldn't stop racing. Was this really her life now? Could she trust it? A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Darasimi?" A woman's voice called. She hesitated before answering. "Yes." The door opened slightly, and the same woman who had welcomed her the night before stepped in with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ma. I hope you slept well. Breakfast is ready. Should I bring it up here, or would you like to eat downstairs?" Darasimi blinked. Someone was asking her how she wanted to eat. She was used to waking up and rushing to the streets, sometimes skipping meals just to make enough money. Now, she had a choice. I'll come downstairs," she said quickly, feeling awkward about the idea of being served in bed. "Very well, Ma." The woman nodded and left. Darasimi sat still for a moment before finally getting out of bed. She freshened up and stepped out of the room, her heart pounding slightly as she made her way downstairs. The dining room was something out of a movie. A long table, polished to perfection, with a variety of steaming dishes neatly arranged. Mr. Adewale sat at the far end, dressed in a simple yet expensive-looking outfit. He looked up as she entered. "Good morning, Darasimi. I trust you slept well?" She nodded, suddenly feeling small in the grand space. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He gestured for her to sit. "Come. Eat. Today is going to be a big day for you." She hesitated before sitting. "A big day?" He smiled. "Yes. It's time to talk about your future." Darasimi swallowed as she picked up her spoon. The food looked delicious, but her mind was too busy processing Mr. Adewale's words. A big day? Talking about her future? What exactly did he mean? She took a small bite of fried yam, her hands slightly shaky. Mr. Adewale sipped his tea, watching her with calm eyes. When she finally looked up, he leaned forward. "Tell me, Darasimi, if you could do anything at all, what would it be?" She blinked. "Sir, I mean it. If you had the opportunity to learn, to grow, to build something for yourself, what would you do?" Darasimi hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. Her whole life had been about survival, not dreams. She had never allowed herself to think beyond the next meal, the next sale. I don't know," she admitted quietly. Mr. Adewale smiled knowingly. "That's understandable. You've spent years fighting to survive. But now, I want you to start thinking differently." She shifted in her seat. "Sir, I appreciate everything you're doing for me, but what if I'm not meant for this kind of life? What if I don't belong here?" His expression turned serious. "Darasimi, do you know the difference between rich people and poor people?" She shook her head. "Opportunity. That's all. You're smart, hardworking, and kind. The only thing you've lacked is the right opportunity. But now, you have one. And I want you to take it." Her heart pounded. It was scary, the idea of stepping into a new world. But deep inside, a tiny spark of hope flickered. I want to learn," she said finally. "I want to do more. Be more." Mr. Adewale's face lit up. "Good. That's all I needed to hear. Your new journey starts today." Darasimi followed Mr. Adewale and Tunde into a sleek office space inside the house. It was nothing like the small, crowded shops she was used to seeing. The furniture was polished, the air smelled of coffee and fresh paper, and the walls were lined with books and awards. It was a place of power. Mr. Adewale gestured for her to sit across from him. "We are going to take this step by step. I don't expect you to know everything immediately, but I want you to have options." Darasimi nodded slowly, still overwhelmed by everything. "What kind of options?" He leaned forward. I want you to think about what interests you. Business, fashion, technology, anything at all. Whatever you choose, I will make sure you get the best training. She bit her lip. But sir, I don't have any skills. I've only ever sold oranges. Tunde chuckled. And that's not easy. You negotiated with customers, managed your little business, and survived in tough conditions. Those are skills too. She never thought of it that way. To her, selling oranges was just survival, not something valuable. Mr. Adiwale smiled. Every great person starts somewhere. What matters is what you do with the opportunity in front of you. She took a deep breath. For the first time, she felt like her life wasn't just about struggling. There was a possibility of something more. I want to learn about business, she said, surprising even herself. Mr. Adiwale nodded approvingly. Good choice. We'll start immediately. Tunde will help guide you. You'll take lessons, read, and even visit some of my companies. You'll learn how everything works. Darasimi's hands trembled slightly. It was a world she had never imagined being part of, but now, it was opening up right in front of her. Are you ready? Mr. Adiwale asked. She took a deep breath and met his gaze. Yes. I'm ready. What will Darasimi face? What will happen next? Tell us where you're watching from and drop your comments in the comment section if you want a part 2.